Alright, howdy there again, folks. Me, of course, Brandon Wenzel, your one-armed reviewer. Here to do my special features edition of the One Armed Swordsman. Why? Because, of course, I know Kung Fu, even with my one arm. Still know Kung Fu. Getting better all the damn time. And yeah, I'm actually really excited to do these special features on this. The One Armed Swordsman here, because like I said in my previous video, which, yes, I know I haven't uploaded to my Facebook page just yet, but I will probably right after I do this. But yeah, as I mentioned in my video, I am such a huge fan of this, and a huge fan of Jimmy Wang Yu, and pretty much everybody in the film, so I'm really excited to go ahead and do this. So I'm probably going to end up taking a little bit longer with this one, but we'll see. I'm gonna try to rush. Okay, so One Armed Swordsman. What to say about it? All right, well, you have to start with the director on this one. Cheng Che. Well, you know what? No, you really have to start with the production company, I suppose, with the Shaw Brothers. The Shaw Brothers, if you're a fan of classic martial arts cinema, there's no way you've escaped the Shaw Brothers. There just isn't. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're a fan. I have run into some people who, for reasons that I cannot explain, though personally I'm claiming communism, do not seem to enjoy the Shaw Brothers films. It baffles me. But if you don't know, I mean, they were, for decades in Hong Kong cinema, they were the movie entity in Hong Kong. I mean, really, for a very long time, they had essentially no challengers, no serious challengers to their throne in that regard. And not just in martial arts cinema. They're usually remembered for martial arts cinema because they played such a big role in really kind of catapulting that into the forefront of things. But at the same time, they did everything. They did musicals, drama, erotica. I mean, they were, in a lot of ways, the Hong Kong cinema industry for a very long time. And it wasn't really up until kind of around the 80s or so when things started to slip a little bit for them. You had some competition coming in with companies like Golden Harvest. And they eventually transitioned to TV, and they're still around. The entity that they eventually became was TVB, which is the biggest television series or television network in Hong Kong. And sadly, the last remaining Shaw brother, Sir Run Run Shaw, who, I mean, was the producer on God only knows how many films, sadly passed away. I think, it was either early this year or late last year. I believe it was early this year. And he died at, like, the age of, like, 108, though. So, damn, man. Damn. And his wife, Mona Fong, she's still around. And she's, like, 80-something, so awesome. God, there's so much I want to go into with Shaw Brothers. I mean, it really is just the coolest damn thing. Again, so like I said, communists are not generally a big fan of the Shaw Brothers empire, as it were. But me being a staunch defender of democracy, I am a thorough fan of Shaw Brothers, and there really is something absolutely special about the Shaw Brothers films. You know, they, aside from just having, you know, the financial means to do pretty much everything they wanted, they definitely had a system in place that no one else really had. And sometimes that's not always regarded as the best thing. You know, sometimes some of their films are looked at as being sort of like copy and paste as far as the way they were produced, but and I see their point to a certain extent, but you know, the way that they were able to bring things to the forefront, you know, they weren't, for a long time, really, they were at the forefront of martial arts choreography and action. Later on, when you got into the more acrobatic stuff, like with Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung, you know, they kind of took the action to a different place that Shaw Brothers hadn't done so, which is kind of why things started slipping, slipping away from them. But really, up until then, and well, I mean, you did have briefly, sadly briefly, you had Bruce Lee who kind of came in and definitely shook the doors a bit at Shaw Brothers. Shaw Brothers actually had the opportunity to employ Mr. Bruce Lee, but Shaw Brothers were in fact notoriously tight-reined with their money and were not willing to pay his what he wanted, and so he went to Golden Harvest. As a result, well, you know, things didn't exactly go so great for them for a brief period of time, but after his, you know, obviously his passing, you know, they were able to really move forward from that and to hit even stronger for a very long time. But, you know, they really were, I mean, just the production values, the way that they were able to tell stories, not really anybody else could do that. I will honestly say, I mean, Golden Harvest probably comes the closest, and they certainly had some films that definitely came very close in having sort of a Shaw kind of feel, like Last Hurrah for Chivalry is the one that comes immediately to my mind. That was pretty much, I mean, you know, and not to speak ill of Golden Harvest, they were amazing, but they were not known for, you know, their production sets and things like that. They did a lot of their films outdoors because they didn't have the set quality that Shaw Brothers did, where they had effectively an entire town at their disposal for anything, and I mean, they were literally able to shoot, you know, I think it's something like 4 to 6 films at one time, you know, in their lot. And, you know, and it all adds to really just the feel, the Shaw Brothers feel that, again, just nothing else has it. As much as I love Golden Harvest, I'd be lying if I said that Golden Harvest films really have a feel. You know, Sammo Hung films have a feel, Jackie Chan films have a feel. As a whole, though, I would not say that Golden Harvest has a feel. They have excellent movies, but Shaw Brothers, when you're watching a Shaw Brothers film, you know it's a Shaw Brothers film. For better or worse, to be fair. So that's my little thing on Shaw Brothers. And yes, I'm going to go late on this, but do I care? Absolutely not. Because this film fucking deserves it. So, okay, moving on to the director, Chang Che. Well, Chang Che is, without a doubt, one of the most prolific figures in all of martial arts cinema. Arguably the most. There are very, very, very few people who are up in that upper echelon of iconic figures within the genre the way that he is. There are very, very few. And he really kind of brought things back from kind of the way that they'd been doing things in martial arts cinema. He actually started off his career as a film critic and was hired on by Shaw Brothers because, I guess, of his film critiques, as it were. And one of the things that he very, very much wanted to step on at the time, for better or worse, I will completely admit, was at the time that he came into films, the idea of the leading man had sort of become unpopular. It really was more about the leading ladies of the time, like with the excellent film Come Drink With Me. And Chang Che, coming from, literally his father was a warlord, you know, back in kind of the Badland days. Coming from that background, Chang Che was not a big fan of the female heroine, as it were. He, you know, and he himself even admitted, you know, to being, you know, definitely something of a chauvinist. So when he came into things, he pretty much immediately put his foot down on that. He was going to give give the male leads their balls back. They weren't going to be supplementary characters. And this film is definitely an example of Chang-Che's style in that regard. In that, I mean, there's two lovely, amazing female characters in this, but even the one, you know, who has a sword, you know, I mean, she's not very good with it, and, you know, they were often seen as kind of like distractions or obstacles to the male figures in the films, and kind of even going beyond that, you know, at times they were actually detrimental, you know, and Chang-Che spent a lot of his time with his films really cultivating the idea of kind of the bond of brothers, of, you know, martial brotherhood and things like that. And so his films sometimes came off as kind of like almost overly manly at times. And I will admit to that. Chang-Che was not the best when it came to utilizing his female starlets. Though to be fair, I will actually defend him in this regard, that I think that he gets kind of a bum rap in that. In that, in some cases, you know, I honestly think in this film, with Lisa Chow Chow, granted, she doesn't use a sword or anything like that, you know, she is definitely the source of the main character's redemption, in multiple aspects. And, you know, I think that as time went by, Chang-Che really kind of veered off of that. You know, he wasn't terribly interested in telling, you know, love stories or anything like that, but I do think there are very good examples where he actually used female characters to pretty good effect. And in this one, I would say not bad. Not, you know, not aces as it were, but not bad. And like I said, this was the first film that broke $1 million Hong Kong dollars at the box office. Was a huge deal. And like I said, Chang-Che had already been established as a director, but this really set him into motion. So that's my little thing on Chang-Che. I could go on forever, and I perhaps will in another thing. But let's go on. Let's go on to Jimmy Wang Yu, lead of our film. Jimmy Wang Yu holds a unique distinction in the history of martial arts cinema in that he is arguably the first true martial arts cinema star. And what do I mean by that? Well, like I said in my review, prior to real martial arts films, you had swordplay epics, referred to as wuxia films. And those had been popular for quite some time. But really, you know, as, you know, being epic swordplay films, they always emphasize the swordplay. And Jimmy Wang Yu, after his success with this film, he'd done a few films prior to this, but this was really the one that shot him through the roof. You know, he, you know, I mean, I would love to pick his brain on exactly why, you know, his decision to do so, but he was really the one who kind of said, you know, I wonder if maybe the swordplay thing is great, but maybe, you know, we could go over there and actually have just some bare-knuckle ass-kicking to speak of. And he did a film, he directed and starred in a film, a hugely iconic film, which I sadly do not own, because it just hasn't come out here yet. I haven't got a good release on it yet, called The Chinese Boxer. And it is oftentimes regarded as being the first real martial arts film. It wasn't a wuxia film, although, you know, it does have some armed combat. This was the first film that really emphasized the ass-kicking, rather than the swordplay. And so in that regard, since he was the lead in that, he, of course, is in... And again, there are people who argue the point. He is, in some ways, often considered to be effectively the first martial arts star. Now, this is somewhat ironic in that Jimmy Wang Yu himself, like I said in my review for One Armed Swordsman, was not really a martial artist in any particular regard. As to whether or not he had any martial arts background to speak of is really hard to say. Quite a few sources say no. He himself in interviews has in fact said that he did, that he did actually practice martial arts. But he came from a really great physical background. He was a competitive swimmer and, a bunch of other things like that. And I believe he was in like the public defense force, as it were. So I'm sure he had some combat training there, but however much martial arts he may or may not have partaken in, it could probably be assumed that whatever it was not that much. He was certainly not a devout practitioner of any traditional martial arts. But, again, this is something where I have to give him a lot more credit for than some other people do. When you watch some of his films, like The Fast Fists and The Savage Killers, the style of choreography in these type of films, compared to now, when you look at films now that are made, fight scenes are usually done with, you usually get about 5 or 6 movements, maybe, before they edit and do a cut and then move to another scene. Now, the great thing about it is it allows, for faster looking action because you don't have to remember as many movements per cut. But back in these days, well, they didn't do that. You didn't have, that was just going to take way too much time for them to go over there and do this. And so you would see Jimmy Wang Yu go over there. I mean, he would clear out a room of, 20 plus people, and he would do it in just a few cuts. I mean, some of his fight scenes in some of these films are, for him to go over there and take out, again, 20 plus people, you're talking about, he maybe had a dozen cuts in some of these. I really think that that is arguably, in some ways, even more impressive than some of the things that are done today by legitimate martial artists. The fact that, he would go over there and just basically everybody would kind of come to him and he'd just kick the shit out of them. And he'd do so in so few takes. And he himself has even said, that when it came time to do the choreography and stuff, that he had a knack for it and, really didn't take him all that long to figure this stuff out. So maybe he wasn't a martial artist in any traditional regard, but the guy certainly had a real talent for physical ability because, again, you're talking about going over there and taking on scores of people in a single fight scene with not very many takes and not very many cuts. And that is just very, very impressive. And again, I would challenge many of the martial arts stars of today to try to do that. And I do not think that most of them would be able to come through looking as good as Jimmy Wang Yu did. But let's see, what else? Some other things, I mean, he starred in quite a few films throughout the years. Before he did this, he did a film called The Magnificent Trio, which was a great film. And like I said, he really did more of the swordplay films until he got to The Chinese Boxer. And after he had a falling out with Shaw Brothers, which I won't go into right now, but he had a falling out with Shaw Brothers that didn't end well, so he had to leave the studio. But he continued to make films since he was a huge star at the time. It really wasn't until Bruce Lee came along that you had somebody who kind of took the reins away from him as being sort of the leading action star at the time. And then again, after, sadly, Bruce Lee passed away, he really just jumped right back into it. And the thing that I think made him so successful in so many regards was that he really did have sort of a working class hero type of feel to him. Excuse me. He wasn't T. Lung, where T. Lung was very much the stoic, statuesque lead actor. Nor was he David Chang, who was, very charismatic, a bit of a clown at times, or even Chen Quan Tai, who was, the fierce martial artist. he was none of those things. He was, he was a guy who, again, didn't really have a strong martial arts background, but he could, make it look somewhat convincing, and wasn't always the greatest actor, but when you put him in the role of the silent badass, he was able to sell it really well. And I think that's really one of the things that made him so continuously desirable, was that he was able to do that so well. I'm trying to think. I mean, some of his other iconic films, he effectively combined this character and his character from the Chinese Boxer to create one of his other very iconic characters, which I'm sure I will eventually get to, called the One Armed Boxer, which is fairly self-explanatory. He would later go on, he did a film called Master of Flying Guillotine, where he revisited the role of the One Armed Swordsman in that, or not the One Armed Swordsman, the One Armed Boxer. But he did actually revisit the role of the One Armed Swordsman, despite not being employed by Shaw Brothers at the time. He actually had a film where he met Zatoichi, the Blind Swordsman. He had, what was it? He did a film with David Chang, who David Chang actually, when Jimmy Wang Yu left Shaw Brothers, David Chang actually took up the role of the One Armed Swordsman in the film called The New One Armed Swordsman, which unfortunately didn't hold quite as well as Jimmy Wang Yu's rendition, in that it only had one film. But despite that, and that isn't to speak ill of David Chang at all, but despite that fact, the two of them actually teamed up playing their one-armed swordsman roles in a film called The One Armed Swordsman, which is a great little film. You can find it in a collection. Like I said, I mean, like I already brought up the Fast Fists and Savage Killers. I mean, he really, I have a huge regard for Jimmy Wang Yu. I have my own little Jimmy Wang Yu collection of films. And another thing, I will say this about him, one thing that I don't think he gets a lot of credit for is as his role as a director. When you look at the directing roles that he's directed some of his best films. He directed The One Armed Boxer. He directed Master of Flying Guillotine, which is, considered to be one of the greatest, cult martial arts hits. Despite that fact, he never really gets the credit for that. I think that he's always just kind of looked at as, as the actor, and of course, he's fairly old at this point, and so sometimes I think he kind of gets forgotten in that regard, which is very unfortunate in my opinion, because he really, I don't know if you would exactly say that he's a A+ director, as it were, an S-class director if you're a fan of video games, but at least not in the light of maybe Chang Che or Lau Ke-Lung, but the fact that he was able to be very successful and some of his best films are in fact the ones that he directed, I think says a lot for Jimmy Wang Yu. And he's actually still around. He's still doing things. He showed up in a few roles just a couple of years ago. I actually learned while I was doing this, and I was surprised that nobody had brought this shit to my attention. Usually I'm pretty much on top of this, but I actually became aware that back in 2011 he had a stroke. But in true Jimmy Wang Yu fashion, he busted his ass on his physical therapy, and I guess he is more or less back to normal, as far as most things are concerned. He can walk and talk fairly normally, and I guess the only thing, rather ironically, that was kind of hindered was in fact his left arm, and to his immense credit, he was the first person to in fact make the one-armed swordsman joke. So good going, Jimmy Wang Yu, on that one. Nothing but class, man. Nothing but class. That's all I can go into. It's going to be like 30 minutes, but I don't care. I cannot. Okay. Some of the other things to go into here. Some of the other people involved in the film. Violet Pen Yingzi, who plays the Queen Cunt in this film, who severs the main character's arm. I'll do her and Lisa Chow Chow together because I don't forget but I don't usually focus on the female characters in these films, not because they aren't great or lovely or noteworthy, but because most of the time they aren't in a lot of films that I'm familiar with, because I focus on martial arts films, and they usually aren't, martial artists. But I did want to bring up with Violet Pen-Ying-zi. She was in Come Drink With Me. She played kind of a small role in that. And in 2004, been 10 years ago, she was in the film Around the World in 80 Days, the Jackie Chan film. She played an old woman in that, which is pretty much all I have on her. And Lisa Chow Chow. The only specifically noteworthy thing that I can bring to attention was that she was in a film with Jimmy Wang Yu, I believe prior to this, I believe it was before One Armed Swordsman, called The Assassin, where she actually played a very similar role, sort of the redeeming heroine, as it were. So that's pretty much all I have on them, unfortunately. Let's see, Tiang Fang, who played the master in the film, he's one of the great things about Shaw Brothers was that back in those days, the actors were under contract, and so they would work on these films, and you would see a lot of these guys over and over and over again. And the cool thing about it was you begin to recognize these faces, you begin to form, personal favorites, and Tiang Fang is absolutely great. He was one of these guys who was in quite a few Shaw Brothers films at the time. My favorite role of his, aside from this role, of the Master in this, is actually in Return of the One Armed Swordsman, where he plays the main villain. Like I said, a lot of times they would just transition these characters from one film to the next, and he played a great role in both of these films. So that's my little thing on Tiang Fang. Still alive. Check that out. Still alive. Like 80-something years old, so good for him. Young Chi-hing, who played the One-Armed Devil, a guy who I absolutely love. He's one of these guys, every time I see him, he makes me smile in these films. He was great for playing these kind of old master types, though I wouldn't say that it was exactly what he was known for. But he tended to play these very jovial characters. He had a great smile. Aside from this, which is probably my favorite role of his as the One-Armed Devil, who's one of my favorite villains from these type of films. Some of my other favorite roles he did, he had a great role as Tai Chi Master in a film called The Shadow Boxer, which was more or less Shaw Brothers' attempt to kind of rip off Bruce Lee's breakout film, The Big Boss. But he had a great role as a Tai Chi Master in that. He himself, I don't believe, had any real martial arts training or anything like that, but he for an older guy, he managed to do pretty well as far as, and of course they stunt actors for certain things, but he still managed to look pretty good doing what he did. But probably my favorite role of his, besides One Armed Devil, was in a awesome kind of Chinese noir film that not too many people are familiar with, even though it is available here in America, called The Lizard, which I am a huge fan of. I cannot say enough good things about that film. Wherein he played the, not the chief of police, but I guess I guess he would have been like the third in command. I don't know exactly what position that would make him, but he was like in charge of the basic day-to-day operations. And he had such a great role in that. The film is very reminiscent of like the Green Hornet or Dick Tracy, and he had an awesome role in that. He sadly, unfortunately, did pass away. He was fairly old even by the time he did this film. He passed away back in 1984, so 2 years before I was born, unfortunately. But the guy just worked. He was in tons and tons of films. I mean, he literally was working up until the year of his death. One of his releases was even released after his death, 1985. So, to Young Ching-hee, absolutely huge kudos to him. The dad, who played the actor who played Fan Gong's father. I didn't actually bring him up all that much in the review. He was played by I cannot say enough good things about him, Ku Feng. Ku Feng is another guy who was in tons and tons of Shaw Brothers films. Probably, I think he probably best known as being something of a villain actor. Though he never really played like I don't think he ever played. Well, no, I think he might have actually played in like some independent films. I think he played, lead heroic roles, but at least in major productions, didn't really play lead heroic characters. Though he did occasionally play some heroic characters, but usually was more sinister. Like, usually if you see Ku Feng in a Shaw Brothers film, he's up to something nefarious. Wasn't always the lead villain, but, the guy, some of my favorite roles of him, he is in Return of the One Armed Swordsman. He plays one of the villains in that. Again, moving from one film right to the next. Duel of Fists, you get to see him as a Thai boxer, Muay Thai fighter. In that, he plays one of the, not the main villain, but sort of the main villain's head underling, as it were. And he does an amazing job in that. I don't know what Ku Feng's background was, if he had any real martial arts training, but I know I've seen video and stuff like that of him training, some of the other actors and stuff like that, and some of their physical skills. So it may very well have been that, maybe he had like a kickboxing background or something like that. He certainly had some measure of physical skill. Some other great roles that he had, he was the lead villain in The Avenging Eagle, which is probably one of my absolute favorite roles of his, where he has a great showdown against the late great Alexander Fu Sheng, and the stoic, one of my favorite roles for the stoic hero, actually playing kind of a cool anti-hero in this film, T. Lung. Well, in that film, in The Avenging Eagle, as it were. He played the lead villain in The Bat Without Wings, which is a very odd swordplay film where he kind of dresses up like Gene Simmons from Kiss and kills a bunch of people. Fun little swordplay mystery film. So that's Ku Feng. Still around as well, and up until I think just a few years ago, still acting and stuff. So again, kudos to him. Oh, all right. Let's do some interesting goon news. Interesting goon news. All right. Well, in the film, I always refer to him as the staff guy in the film, because in the entire film, he's the only person who, once he realizes that his sword is not going to be effective against the sword catchers that One Armed Devil has developed, he's the only person who changes his fucking tactics and grabs a piece of wood nearby and effectively uses it like a staff. And the person who does that is a guy named Cheng Lui. Cheng Lui or something like that. Chinese names are not easy to pronounce, and unfortunately they're not easy to phonetically spell, which makes it even harder for somebody like me. But Cheng Lui I love the guy. Absolutely love the guy. He was a great kind of secondary player in a lot of the early films. He co-starred in The Magnificent Trio, was one of the Magnificent Trio, with Jimmy Wang Yu. And he was just this very kind of stocky, very broad guy, kind of had a Bolo Young type of figure to him, and often played these great little heroic roles. He played the old master, the old sword master in Last Hurrah for Chivalry, and really was just an awesome. Again, he's another one of these guys who, when I would see him, I always smile. He never managed to make it to, really the main stage, as it were, but, he played some amazing character roles and, definitely had some great physicality to him, so, I had to bring him up. Let's see. one of the two goons who worked under Smiling Tiger, who were unarmed by the main villain, or by the main character rather, was played by a guy named Fan Mei Sheng, or Fan Mei Sheng, who, for me, I will always remember him from the awesome film The Water Margin as the Black Whirlwind. By the way, if you have the opportunity to see the The Water Margin, I would definitely suggest it, particularly if you are a fan of the Suikoden series of video games, because those films, The Water Margin as well as All Men Are Brothers, and a bunch of films that Shaw Brothers did are, in fact, based on the Suikoden legend. So he plays an awesome character in that called the Black Whirlwind. The thing that and he was another guy who was in tons and tons of films. The other thing that I always remember him for is that his son is actually Fancy Wong, a.k.a. Terry Fan, who very iconically played Master Jin in Ip Man and Ip Man 2, as well as a bunch of other things. I mean, his son is, he's definitely a guy on the rise, in my opinion. And that's his dad, which absolutely blew me away, because his dad is this big, kind of, heavy-set, jovial guy, and Terry Fan is not. But yeah, so that's a great little tie-in thing there. God, I know this is longer than the fucking thing, but I really had to. This is the reason why I separated this from my actual reviews, because I didn't have nearly, and I still don't have enough time. I'm gonna have to do more later on. But yeah, as another thing, I guess Chue Hung, who is the main villain in King Boxer, I guess he's actually somewhere in there too. There are other people too. I mean, if you look up, if you want to completely supersede your pal Sifu Brandon, as it were, there are some great websites that have tons of information, like HK Cinemagic and HKMDB, that have a lot of this stuff. You're not going to get quite the exuberance that I'll give you, but so there are tons of people in these films. God, try to cut this off before it gets to be 40 minutes. Like I said, so much more that I would love to go into. But I guess I'm going to have to end it there. And talk to anybody who loves Shaw Brothers and who loves these films. This really is the amount of time that it takes to really go into all this stuff. So, that said, because when your city is under siege by the cyber tracker, who happens to be putting up human lanterns, well, you have to defeat him with the deadly breaking sword. For all these reasons and more, I'm Brandon Wenzel. I review martial arts films. I take a very long time on some of my special features because, of course, I know Kung Fu, with or without the use of both my arms. And, as a special thing, I'm going to remember to do this. My next review, sneak thing for all you folks, if you're willing to sit through almost 40 minutes of this, is of course going to be Return of the One Armed Swordsman, which hopefully I'm going to get through today and hopefully do a review today. We'll see. So look forward to that, hopefully. And again, please share this, please repost it, do whatever you want, to help keep this stuff moving. So, that said, have a good one, folks. I hope you enjoyed this.